high above the mortal world, where the air thins and the clouds swirl like restless spirits, stands Mount Olympus, a realm of untold power, shimmering palaces, and divine drama. This isn't just a mountain, it's the throne of the gods, the stage where the 12 Olympians weave their epic tales of love, war, and betrayal. Picture it, Zeus, with his thunderbolts crackling in his grasp, Hera's piercing gaze watching over alliances and rivalries, Poseidon stirring the seas with a mere flick of his trident. These aren't just mythical figures, they're forces of nature, larger than life, shaping the fate of mortals and immortals alike. And their stories, they're as wild, unpredictable, and utterly human as anything you've ever heard. Think about the last time you felt powerless, maybe standing in a storm, or caught in the middle of someone else's argument. Now imagine living in a world where those storms, those battles, were controlled by beings who laughed, loved, and schemed like the worst of us. The Olympians weren't distant, untouchable deities, they were flawed, fierce, and full of fire. They meddled in mortal lives, fought over lovers, held grudges for centuries, and sometimes even lost. That's what makes them unforgettable. Their myths aren't just ancient tales, they're mirrors reflecting our own ambitions, passions, and downfalls. So what happens when these 12 titans of myth come together? Chaos, beauty, power struggles that shake the heavens. This is the story of how the Olympians rose, ruled, and reshaped the world, a saga of lightning and laughter, of whispered alliances and earth-shattering betrayals. From Aphrodite's irresistible charm to Ares' blood-stained battle lust, each god and goddess brings something explosive to the pantheon, and by the end of this journey, you'll see why these myths have endured for thousands of years. Because when gods walk among us, even the ordinary becomes legendary. Ready to step onto Olympus, let's begin. Zeus didn't start as the king of the gods. He had to fight for that throne. Born into chaos, hidden away as a baby to escape his father Kronos, who devoured his own children out of fear they would overthrow him. But fate had other plans. Raised in secret, Zeus grew powerful, and when the time came, he led his siblings in a war against the Titans that would shake the very foundations of the world. The clash, known as the Titanomachy, wasn't just a battle, it was the birth of a new order. With thunder shaking the skies and mountains crumbling, Zeus and the Olympians emerged victorious, casting the Titans into the abyss of Tartarus and claiming dominion over the cosmos. Once crowned, Zeus became more than just a ruler, he was the enforcer of divine law, the wielder of justice, and the storm that cleansed the earth. His lightning bolt wasn't just a weapon, it was a symbol of his authority, a reminder that no one, mortal or immortal, could escape his judgment. The eagle, soaring high above the world, became his sacred messenger, carrying his will across the heavens. Yet for all his might, Zeus was far from perfect. His weakness for mortal women and goddesses alike sparked countless legends and just as many feuds. Hera, his wife and queen, endured his betrayals with fury, turning her wrath not on Zeus, but on his lovers and their children. Yet even with his flaws, Zeus embodied the contradictions of leadership. He could be fair, rewarding the just and punishing the wicked, yet he was also capricious, letting his whims shape the lives of those below. His rule wasn't just about power, it was about balance. The gods needed a king who could command respect, but also navigate the web of alliances, rivalries, and passions that made Olympus so volatile. And that's why, despite everything, Zeus remained unchallenged, because when the storms raged and the heavens trembled, there was no doubt who held the lightning. Hera, radiant and regal, sat beside Zeus not just as his wife, but as the unshakable queen of Olympus. While Zeus ruled the skies, she commanded the sacred bonds of marriage, weaving the threads of devotion and duty that held both gods and mortals to their vows. Her presence was as commanding as the golden peacock feathers that adorned her throne, each eye a silent witness to betrayal. Yet for all her power, Hera's story is etched in the scars of jealousy, a goddess who punished not the unfaithful king, but those caught in his gaze. Take Io, for example, a mortal woman transformed into a white cow by Zeus's desperate attempt to hide his infidelity. Hera, ever watchful, wasn't fooled. She sent a relentless gadfly to torment Io, driving her across continents in an endless cycle of agony. Then there was Leto, pregnant with Zeus's twins, denied shelter by Hera's decree until she found refuge on a floating island. Even Hercules, Zeus's demigod son, faced Hera's wrath from birth, his life a gauntlet of trials spun from her fury. These weren't just punishments, they were warnings etched in divine fire. Cross the queen, and the heavens themselves would tremble. Yet to paint Hera only as vengeful misses the depth of her divinity. The cow, sacred to her, symbolized fertility and the nurturing strength of the earth qualities she bestowed upon faithful unions. Peacocks, with their iridescent plumage, mirrored her pride and the unblinking vigilance she held over sacred oaths. Mortals prayed to her for blessings on their weddings, for she understood the weight of promises better than any immortal. Her own marriage, though stormy, was eternal, a paradox that mirrored the messy, enduring nature of love itself. Hera's power lay in her contradictions. She was protector and persecutor, a goddess who could crown a bride with joy or hurl thunderbolts of retribution. In the end, her myths remind us that even the divine grapple with heartbreak, and that loyalty, whether broken or kept, shapes destinies far beyond the altar. Beneath the rolling waves and crashing tides, where sunlight fades into the crushing dark, Poseidon ruled with the kind of fury only the sea can muster. His dominion stretched beyond the surface, every crashing wave, every hidden trench, every whisper of foam belonged to him. The god of the seas wasn't just a distant force of nature, he was a storm given form, his moods as unpredictable as the waters he commanded. One moment, he could cradle sailors home with gentle currents. The next, he could smash their ships to splinters with a flick of his trident. That three-pronged spear wasn't just a weapon, it was the key to his power, capable of summoning tsunamis, carving new islands from the ocean floor, or shaking the earth itself until cities crumbled. But Poseidon's story wasn't just about destruction. Take the horse, for example, a creature he crafted from the crest of a wave, its mane as wild as the surf, its hooves pounding the earth like thunder. He gifted it to humanity, a symbol of both his generosity and his pride. Yet that same pride fueled his bitter rivalry with Athena. When they clashed over patronage of Athens, Poseidon struck the Acropolis with his trident, unleashing a saltwater spring to prove his worth. Athena answered with the olive tree, a gift of peace and prosperity. The city chose wisdom over the sea's fury, and Poseidon never forgot the slight. His vengeance wasn't just petty, it was legendary. When Odysseus blinded his son, the Cyclops Polyphemus, the god hounded the hero for years, turning a short voyage into a decade of torment. Even among the Olympians, Poseidon stood apart. While Zeus commanded the sky, his brother ruled a kingdom just as vast and far more mysterious. Sailors prayed to him with offerings, knowing their survival depended on his whims. Cities built temples by the shore, hoping to appease his temper. But Poseidon wasn't just chaos, he was the deep's silent creator, shaping coastlines and cradling lost ships in underwater caves. His myths remind us that the sea, like its god, is never one thing. It's life and death, beauty and terror, a force that gives and takes without apology. And in Poseidon's shadow, humanity learned a hard truth: you don't conquer the ocean, you survive it. Demeter walked the earth not as a distant goddess, but with her hands deep in the soil, her breath the warmth that coaxed seeds from the ground. Where she stepped, wheat sprang golden; where she wept, the land lay barren. She wasn't just a symbol of harvest, she was its heartbeat. Mortals knew her as the giver of grain, the one who taught them to plow and plant, turning wild earth into fields of abundance. But Demeter's greatest myth isn't about life, it's about loss and how the world echoes with a mother's grief. It began with Persephone, her radiant daughter, picking flowers in a meadow. One moment, the earth was fragrant with blossoms; the next, it split open, and Hades, lord of the dead, surged forth in his chariot. He seized Persephone, dragging her into the underworld to be his queen. Demeter's anguish was so vast, it scorched the earth, crops withered, rivers ran dry. Winter clamped its teeth into the world, not as a season, but as a curse. Mortals starved, their prayers rising like smoke, but Demeter wandered, hollow-eyed, refusing to let the earth bloom until her daughter was returned. Even the Olympians couldn't ignore the devastation. Zeus, torn between his brother's claim and the cries of humanity, intervened. A deal was struck. If Persephone had eaten nothing in the underworld, she'd be freed. But she'd tasted 6 pomegranate seeds, a handful of crimson gilt. So it was decreed she'd spend 6 months below the earth and 6 above, and thus the seasons were born. When Persephone ascends, Demeter's joy paints the world in green and gold. When she descends, the goddess's sorrow blankets the land in frost. Demeter's story isn't just myth, it's the raw truth of cycles. The earth's hunger and plenty, the way life folds into death and rises again. She didn't just explain the seasons, she gave humanity a language for their own sorrows, their own resurrections. Farmers still whisper her name when sowing seeds, knowing every harvest is a gift and every winter a testament to love's enduring weight. Athena didn't enter the world like other gods. She burst forth fully armored from Zeus's skull, a blazing declaration of wisdom and war. The king of the gods had been plagued by headaches so violent even the heavens trembled. When Hephaestus split his head open with an axe, out sprang Athena, her battle cry echoing across Olympus, her eyes sharp with divine intellect. This wasn't just a birth, it was an omen. From that moment, Athena stood apart, a goddess who wielded strategy like a weapon, whose very presence tipped the scales of fate. War wasn't just blood and brutality to Athena, it was a chessboard. While Ares reveled in chaos, she mastered the art of tactics, guiding heroes like Odysseus and Perseus with whispers of foresight. In the Trojan War, her influence was everywhere, from the cunning of the wooden horse to the duel between Hector and Achilles. She didn't just favor victory, she demanded ingenuity. Her gifts weren't mere strength, but the ability to outthink the enemy. The owl, her sacred companion, became the symbol of this wisdom, a creature that sees through darkness, turning the unseen into advantage. Then there's the olive tree, her legendary offering to Athens. When Poseidon challenged her for the city's patronage, striking the ground to unleash a saltwater spring, Athena responded by planting a single olive seed. It grew into an emblem of peace, prosperity, and resilience, roots deep enough to survive drought, branches sturdy enough to shelter generations. The Athenians, recognizing the tree's enduring promise, chose her as their protector. Her temple, the Parthenon, still crowns the Acropolis, a testament to the marriage of wisdom and civilization. but Athena's myths reveal more than just her brilliance. Take Arachne, the mortal weaver who dared to rival her. Their contest ended not in triumph, but tragedy. Athena's pride wounded. Arachne transformed into a spider, forever spinning threads as a reminder of hubris. Even the wise falter, and in Medusa's curse, Athena's role is darker still, punishing the victim rather than the god who wronged her. These stories peel back her polished armor, showing a goddess as complex as the strategies she spun, capable of justice and jealousy, protection and pettiness. Athena's legacy isn't just in temples or tales, it's in the very idea that wisdom and war can coexist. She taught mortals that the mind is the greatest weapon, that foresight outlasts brute force. From the courtroom to the battlefield, her spirit lingers, in every scholar's pursuit of truth, every general's meticulous plan. Because Athena proved that even in the clash of swords, it's the quietest thought that changes the world. Apollo rode the sun's chariot across the sky, painting dawn in gold and dusk in fire, but his brilliance wasn't confined to daylight alone. This radiant god wielded twin gifts, the scorching clarity of truth and the intoxicating fire of art. His lyre's strings could calm storms or stir armies, its melodies threading through the very fabric of Olympus. Musicians prayed to him before performances, poets sought his whispers in moments of inspiration, and warriors begged for his arrows to strike true. Yet Apollo was no distant patron. His myths pulse with passion, hubris, and the kind of tragedy that etches itself into history. Take Delphi, his sacred oracle, where the Pythia breathed in volcanic vapors and channeled his prophecies. Kings and peasants alike climbed the serpentine path to her temple, desperate for glimpses of fate. But Apollo's truths were never simple. When Croesus asked if he should wage war, the oracle replied, "You will destroy a great empire." Blinded by confidence, he marched only to realize too late the empire destroyed was his own. Apollo's wisdom was a double-edged sword, revealing just enough to tempt mortals into their own undoing. The laurel wreath, his sacred symbol, wasn't just a crown for victors. It was a reminder of Daphne, the nymph who chose transformation into a tree over his pursuit, her leaves forever twined in his hair as penance for desire unchecked. Then there was Marsyas, the satyr foolish enough to challenge Apollo's musical mastery. When the Muses declared the god the victor, his punishment was as brutal as it was poetic. Marsyas flayed alive, his skin a grotesque testament to mortal arrogance. Yet Apollo's cruelty wasn't without remorse. When his lover Hyacinthus died in a discus accident, the god's grief spilled into the earth, birthing the hyacinth flower, its petals forever stained with the whispered letters of his name. Apollo's duality defined him. He was the healer whose arrows could bring plague, the artist who demanded perfection, the lover whose affections often burned too bright. His myths teach us that light casts shadows, that creativity and destruction, love and loss are inseparable. Whether through a poet's verse or the sun's relentless gaze, Apollo's presence lingers, reminding us that brilliance is never without cost. Artemis moved through the forests like moonlight, given form silent, swift, utterly untamed. While other Olympians held court in gilded halls, she chose the wilderness, her silver bow glinting among ancient oaks as she led her band of nymphs on endless hunts. This was no mere pastime, it was a declaration. Artemis demanded freedom, not just for herself, but for all young women who sought refuge from the grasp of men. She swore eternal chastity, binding her nymphs to the same vow, and woe to any who tried to break it. Take the fate of Actaeon, the hunter who stumbled upon her bathing in a secluded spring. For his crime of witnessing her nakedness, Artemis didn't just strike him down, she transformed him into a stag. his own hounds tearing him apart as he tried to scream with a voice no longer human. Her wrath was swift, but it wasn't senseless. Artemis punished those who violated boundaries, who thought the wild, and the women within it, were theirs to claim. Yet for all her ferocity, Artemis was also a guardian. Girls on the brink of womanhood prayed to her for protection, leaving offerings of honey and woven garlands at her altars. In Sparta, young girls trained as athletes in her name, their bodies as strong as their spirits. The bear, sacred to her, symbolized this duality, fierce yet nurturing, wild yet fiercely protective. And when the moon hung heavy in the sky, it was Artemis who guided its glow, her silver chariot tracing paths across the night like a hunter's arrow in the dark. Her myths unravel the paradox of her power. She could bring sudden death with a single shot, yet ease childbirth with whispered prayers. She roamed where no gods dared, answerable to no one, yet she knelt to aid mortal women in their darkest hours. Artemis wasn't just the huntress, she was the unbroken voice in the wilderness, a reminder that some things, like the untouched forest and the untamed heart, refuse to be conquered. Ares stormed onto battlefields not as a tactician, but as a force of pure fury, blood splattering his armor, his war cry raw enough to shake the bravest souls. Where Athena calculated every move like a grandmaster, Ares embodied the chaos of war itself, the frenzy where reason burned away and only instinct remained. The other Olympians despised him, not for his violence, but for his lack of honor. Zeus sneered at his recklessness, Aphrodite mocked his brutishness, and even his own parents turned their faces when he entered their halls. But Ares didn't care. War wasn't meant to be honorable. It was meant to be felt, the crunch of bone beneath a spear, the metallic tang of blood in the air, the way cities crumbled under the weight of unchecked rage. His symbols told the story, the spear, forever thirsty, and the vulture, circling patiently over the carnage he left behind. Ares didn't fight for kingdoms or justice. He fought because destruction was his language. The myths paint him as a laughingstock wounded by mortal heroes, trapped in a bronze jar by giants, howling for rescue. But those stories miss the point. Ares thrived in the margins, where battles weren't glorious but grotesque, where soldiers wept for mothers they'd never see again. He was the god armies whispered about in the dark, the one who didn't judge their fear, only fed it. Then there was Aphrodite. Their affair was Olympus's worst-kept secret, a union of opposites that scandalized even the most jaded gods. Where she was grace, he was grit. Where she spun desire, he sowed discord. Hephaestus's golden net, trapping them mid-embrace, wasn't just revenge. It was a divine punchline, proof that love and war could both leave you exposed. Yet in each other, they found something the others couldn't understand, a raw, unfiltered honesty. Aphrodite didn't flinch at his blood-stained hands, and Ares never asked her to be anything but herself. Ares's legacy isn't in temples or tributes. It's in the way soldiers, centuries later, still feel his presence in the adrenaline of combat, the moment strategy gives way to survival, when the line between monster and man blurs. He wasn't the god of noble causes. He was the god of what war really is, messy, primal, and utterly, unforgivingly human. Aphrodite didn't walk into the world. She rose from it, emerging radiant and full-formed from the churning sea foam where Kronos' severed flesh had fallen. The waves themselves seemed to bow as she stepped onto the shores of Cyprus, her beauty so staggering even the gods fell silent. This wasn't just attraction, it was a force of nature, an energy that bent wills and toppled empires. Her very presence made flowers bloom in her footsteps, and when she laughed, The sound was said to ignite passions mortals couldn't name, but Aphrodite's power went deeper than surface allure. Take the golden apple, inscribed to the fairest, tossed into Olympus by the spiteful goddess Eris, when Paris of Troy was tasked with choosing between Hera's sovereignty, Athena's wisdom, or Aphrodite's promise of the world's most beautiful woman. His decision didn't just spark a rivalry, it lit the fuse for the Trojan War. Helen's face may have launched 1,000 ships, but it was Aphrodite's whisper that set them sailing. Yet for all her influence, love wasn't kind to its own goddess. Her marriage to Hephaestus, the lame smith, was a mockery, the radiant bound to the unwanted, and her affair with Ares, a collision of fire and blood that left them both exposed, literally, in Hephaestus's humiliating golden net. The dove and scallop shell, sacred to her, tell her story in symbols. The dove, gentle yet relentless, mirrored love's dual nature, soft as a caress one moment, a storm of obsession the next. The scallop shell, cradling her birth, became an emblem of both vulnerability and strength. Its ridges could cut as easily as they could protect. Even her magic girdle, woven with desire, was a weapon disguised as adornment. Aphrodite's myths reveal a truth we still grapple with. Love is chaos dressed in splendor. It builds and destroys in equal measure, and not even its goddess could control its wake. From the ecstasy of Paris and Helen to the tragedy of Pygmalion's statue brought to life only to wither under human frailty, her legacy is a mirror. We see ourselves in her triumphs and failures, a reminder that to love is to surrender to the same forces that shape the tides. Hephaestus's forge roared deep beneath Mount Olympus, a cavernous world of molten metal and ceaseless invention. While the other gods basked in sunlight and splendor, he labored in firelight, his hammer strikes ringing like a heartbeat through the earth. This was no ordinary workshop. It was the birthplace of wonders, golden thrones that moved on their own, mechanical servants with minds of their own, even Pandora, the first woman, shaped from clay and gifted with divine craftsmanship. Hephaestus didn't just make weapons, he breathed life into the impossible, yet his story began with rejection. Born lame, his own mother Hera cast him from Olympus, disgusted by his imperfection. He fell for an entire day before washing ashore on Lemnos, where the sea nymphs tended his broken body. The fall left him with a perpetual limp, but it also forged something unbreakable in him. Where others saw weakness, Hephaestus found strength in fire and ingenuity. When he returned to Olympus, it wasn't as a pitiful outcast, but as a master artisan whose skills even Zeus couldn't ignore. His lameness became a badge of resilience, a reminder that power isn't always in the body, but in the hands that reshape the world. Then there was Aphrodite. Their marriage was less a union and more a divine, just the goddess of beauty bound to the soot-stained smith. While she flaunted her affairs, particularly with Ares, Hephaestus channeled his heartache into his craft. The myths paint him as a cuckold, but they miss the quiet fury beneath his silence. When he finally trapped Aphrodite and Ares in an unbreakable golden net, exposing them to the laughter of the gods, it wasn't just revenge. It was a statement: even the broken can weave nets strong enough to snare the divine. His forge wasn't confined to Olympus. Volcanoes were said to be his underground workshops, their eruptions the sound of his colossal projects taking shape. The Cyclopes, those one-eyed giants of myth, were his apprentices, pounding out thunderbolts for Zeus and tridents for Poseidon under his watchful eye. And his automata, they were miracles of motion, bronze bulls that breathed fire, golden maidens who spoke in whispered hymns, even Talos, the towering bronze guardian of Crete, whose molten core kept enemies at bay. Hephaestus's legacy isn't just in the objects he made, but in the truth they represent. Creation isn't always born from perfection. Sometimes it's the scars, the setbacks, the moments you're thrown from the heavens that ignite the spark of something extraordinary. His myths remind us that the world isn't shaped by those who fit in, but by those who refuse to be defined by what breaks them. Hermes was barely a day old when he committed his first theft, slipping from his cradle to steal Apollo's sacred cattle, then walking them backward to confuse the tracks. By nightfall, he'd invented fire and roasted 2 of them, offering the meat as sacrifice to the gods before sneaking back into his crib, innocent as moonlight. When Apollo stormed in, furious, baby Hermes merely blinked up at him and strummed the first notes on a lyre he'd crafted from a tortoise shell and cowgut. That was the essence of the messenger god, mischief and brilliance wrapped in one quick, silver-tongued package. Speed defined him. With winged sandals strapped to his feet and a traveler's cap shading his eyes, Hermes could outrun even the swiftest Olympian, darting between realms like a whisper. But he wasn't just Zeus's errand boy, he was the patron of crossroads, the one who guided lost souls to the underworld. His caduceus staff, twined with serpents, a beacon in the dark. Unlike Charon's grim fairy, Hermes's passage was sly, a promise that not all journeys ended in sorrow, and oh, the things he invented, the lyre, whose melodies later charmed Apollo into forgiving his cattle theft. The alphabet, carved into stone to help mortals cage their thoughts in symbols. Even the first dice, carved from sheep bone, because why should fate have all the fun? Hermes blurred lines between trickster and benefactor, between mortal and divine. When Odysseus needed Circe's spell broken, it was Hermes who slipped him the antidote. When Perseus faced the Gorgon, Hermes loaned him winged sandals to dance just beyond death's reach. Yet for all his cunning, Hermes had a soft spot for humanity. His altars stood at city gates and roadside shrines, where travelers left worn-out sandals as offerings. Unlike the aloof Olympians, he walked among mortals, sharing their laughter and their scheming. Maybe that's why his legacy endures not in grand temples, but in every joke told at twilight, every letter penned by candlelight, every shortcut taken on a winding road. Because Hermes knew the truth, sometimes the fastest way to change the world is to slip through the cracks. Dionysus arrived in the world with a death sentence already hanging over him. Born to a mortal woman, Semele, who perished in flames when she foolishly demanded to see Zeus in his full divine glory, the infant god was sewn into his father's thigh to finish growing, a living secret, half divine, half human, bursting with contradictions. His childhood wasn't spent on Olympus, but in the wilds, raised by nymphs and satyrs, learning the language of vines and the intoxicating power of the earth itself. This was no sheltered prince. Dionysus grew up straddling worlds, and it showed in everything he touched. Where other gods wielded lightning or tridents, Dionysus carried the Theseus, a fennel staff crowned with a pine cone, dripping with honey. It looked harmless, almost whimsical, until you saw its true power. A single strike could make water gush from bare rock or send mortals spiraling into ecstatic frenzy. His followers, the Maenads, knew this madness intimately. Clad in fawn skins and wreathed in ivy, they danced through mountains in his name, their bare feet tearing through soil, their voices shattering the night. To join them wasn't just worship, it was surrender. When King Pentheus of Thebes tried to spy on their rituals, the Maenads, including his own mother, tore him apart limb from limb, mistaking him for a lion in their wine-soaked haze. Dionysus didn't just forgive transgression, He rewrote reality until enemies became prey. Yet for all his chaos, Dionysus was also the god who taught mortals the art of wine, not just as a drink, but as a sacrament. The grapevine, curling around his arms in every depiction, was more than a symbol. It was an alchemist's tool, turning sorrow into laughter, water into blood, repression into revelation. His festivals, the Dionysia, birthed something equally transformative: theater. From the drunken choruses singing hymns in his honor sprang tragedy and comedy, stages where mortals grappled with fate, love, and folly under his watchful eye. The mask, so central to Greek drama, was his invention, a reminder that identity is fluid, that anyone could be god or monster with the right words. Dionysus's greatest lesson was this: civilization is just a fragile veneer. Strip it away with enough wine, enough music, enough moonlight, and what's left is the raw, pulsing heart of existence. He wasn't just the life of the party, he was the storm at its center, the one who proved that madness and genius, brutality and beauty, are vines twisted around the same unstoppable root. To meet him was to lose yourself. To worship him was to remember what it means to be truly, terrifyingly alive. Hestia's fire burned steady when all others flickered, a quiet glow at the heart of every home, every city, every sanctuary. While the Olympians clashed and schemed, she tended the hearth, the first and last offering at every feast, the unseen hand that kept the world from freezing over. Her power wasn't in thunderbolts or tridents, but in something far more primal: the warmth that drew families close, the flame that welcomed travelers from the cold. Zeus himself honored her above all, granting her place at the center of every household altar, a testament to the truth that civilization doesn't begin with a sword, but with a spark. Unlike her siblings, Hestia chose stillness. When Apollo and Poseidon vied for her hand, she pressed her palm to the earth and swore an oath of eternal virginity, not out of fear, but sovereignty. The hearth was her domain, and she would share it with no one. No tales of vengeful curses or scandalous affairs cling to her name. Instead, she appears in the margins of myths, a background figure ensuring the fire never dies while heroes and gods alike play out their dramas. When the Argonauts set sail, it was Hestia's flame they carried aboard their ship, a piece of home to guide them through uncharted waters. When new cities rose, her sacred fire was kindled first, a promise that even in foreign lands, there would always be a center to return to. The other Olympians ruled with grandeur, but Hestia's influence was intimate. Her flame wasn't just practical, it was a covenant. Extinguishing it meant exile, betrayal, the unraveling of bonds. In Rome, her Vestal virgins guarded her fire with lives pledged to purity, their breath feeding the coals day and night. Let the temple roofs crack and the statues crumble, so long as Hestia's fire burned, the gods would listen. Yet her humility disarmed even the proudest among them. When Dionysus claimed his seat on Olympus, it was Hestia who willingly stepped aside, surrendering her throne to keep harmony among the 12. No fanfare, no resentment, just the quiet understanding that some things matter more than titles. Her legacy lingers in the unspoken rituals we still keep, the way we gather around candles on dark nights, the unshakable instinct to offer food and shelter to strangers. Hestia's myths remind us that not all power roars. Sometimes, it's the whisper of embers in the dark, the certainty that no matter how far we wander, there's always a light waiting to guide us home. Zeus's rule over Olympus was less a monarchy and more a delicate dance of power, where every glance could spark a feud and every whisper carried the weight of divine consequence. The king of the gods didn't command loyalty through force alone. He navigated a web of alliances, grudges, and fragile truces that kept the pantheon from tearing itself apart. Take his marriage to Hera, a union as volatile as the storms he wielded. Their fights weren't just domestic squabbles, they were cosmic events. When Hera unleashed her fury on Hercules, Zeus couldn't openly defy her without risking civil war among the gods. Instead, he maneuvered in shadows, allowing his son's trials to unfold while subtly tipping scales in his favor. This was the paradox of Zeus's leadership, absolute in theory, endlessly negotiable in practice. Sibling rivalries carved fault lines through Olympus. Athena and Poseidon's clash over Athens wasn't just about patronage, it was a battle of visions. Poseidon's saltwater spring symbolized raw, untamed power, while Athena's olive tree promised civilization's enduring grace. Their feud simmered for centuries, resurfacing when Odysseus, Athena's favored hero, blinded Poseidon's son Polyphemus. The sea god's vengeance wasn't merely personal, it was a message to his niece. The oceans answered to no one, not even wisdom's favorite. Yet even amidst their strife, they found uneasy common ground. During the Trojan War, Athena channeled her strategic brilliance into helping Poseidon loosen the city's foundations with earthquakes, proving that divine rivalries could bend when vengeance demanded it. Then there were the alliances forged in shared spite. Hera, Aphrodite, and Athena's rivalry over the golden apple didn't just pit them against each other, it exposed how deeply their domains intertwine. Hera's jealousy, Aphrodite's manipulations, and Athena's calculated interventions wove a tapestry of divine interference that dictated mortal fates. When Paris chose Aphrodite's promise of Helen, he didn't just earn Hera and Athena's wrath, he became a pawn in their endless game of one-upmanship. The Trojan War, often framed as a conflict of heroes, was equally a proxy battle for divine egos. Even love crossed battle lines. Ares and Aphrodite's affair was more than scandal, it was a fusion of opposing forces, war and desire colliding so violently that their passion became a cautionary tale. Hephaestus's golden net, trapping them mid-embrace, didn't just humiliate them. It revealed the insecurities festering beneath divine glamour. The gods' laughter in that moment wasn't just mockery, it was relief. For all their power, they were just as vulnerable to heartbreak and pettiness as the mortals they toyed with. These dynamics weren't just celestial drama, they were the engine of myth. Every hero's journey, every city's rise and fall, bore the fingerprints of divine alliances and vendettas. Olympus wasn't a pantheon of detached rulers, it was a family, with all the messy, explosive loyalty that entails. And like any family, their greatest conflicts often stemmed from the same truth: even gods can't escape their own nature. The world before the Olympians was an age of raw, unfiltered power, where the Titans, elder gods of unimaginable strength, ruled with fists of stone and tempers as vast as the earth itself. Kronos, their king, had seized control by butchering his own father Uranus, only to be told the same fate awaited him. One day, his children would overthrow him. So he devoured them whole: Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, each newborn swallowed to keep the prophecy at bay. But Re, his wife, couldn't bear to lose another. When Zeus was born, she hid him in a cave on Crete, tricking Kronos with a stone wrapped in swaddling clothes. The stage was set for a rebellion that would crack the cosmos in half. Zeus grew in secret, nursed by the nymph Amalthea, his cries masked by the clashing spears of the Curetes dancing outside his cradle. By the time he reached adulthood, he carried more than just his father's thunderous rage. He had cunning. Disguised as a cupbearer, Zeus slipped Kronos a potion that forced him to vomit up his siblings, now fully grown and thirsting for vengeance. United, they rallied the younger gods, Athena's strategic mind, Poseidon's brute force, Hades' shadows, and declared war. The Titanomachy wasn't just a battle. It was 10 years of mountains hurled like pebbles, rivers boiling into steam, the very sky trembling under the clash of divine wills. The Titans had numbers, but the Olympians had something fiercer, allies forged in desperation. Zeus freed the Cyclopes from Tartarus, and in gratitude, they forged his lightning bolts, weapons so potent they could shatter a Titan's immortal flesh. The Hecatoncheires, 100-armed giants, joined the fight, their countless hands ripping boulders from the earth to pummel the enemy. Even Gaia, the primordial Earth Mother, turned against her own children, whispering secrets of the Titans' weaknesses to Zeus. The war reached its crescendo when Zeus unleashed every bolt at once, lighting the heavens with such fury that the Titans, blinded and broken, fell to their knees. Victory came at a price. The Titans who resisted Kronos, Atlas, Menoetius were cast into Tartarus, a void so deep even time stumbled there. Zeus appointed the Hecatoncheires as their eternal jailers, their hundreds of eyes never blinking. But not all Titans faced damnation. Some, like Prometheus and Themis, had sided with the Olympians, their wisdom earning them a place in the new order. As for Atlas, his punishment was poetic. Condemned to hold up the sky, his muscles straining under a weight that would never crush him completely, the Titanomachy wasn't just changing of the guard, it was the birth of a new era. Where the Titans ruled through sheer dominance, the Olympians brought balance, their reign tempered by laws, alliances, and the understanding that even gods could fall. Zeus's rise wasn't merely about power, it was a lesson etched in divine blood. No rule lasts forever, and the only way to avoid Kronos' fate is to be something he never was wise enough to fear what you've conquered. The Olympians didn't just shape the heavens, they wove themselves into the very fabric of mortal lives, twisting fates with the caprice of children pulling wings off flies. Take the Trojan War, where divine meddling turned a petty squabble over beauty into a decade of bloodshed. It began with Eris's golden apple, but it was Aphrodite's promise to Paris that sealed Troy's doom. She didn't just gift him Helen's love, she draped obsession over his eyes like a blindfold. And when Menelaus rallied the Greeks to reclaim his wife, the gods chose sides like gamblers, placing bets. Athena whispered strategies into Odysseus's ear, Poseidon stirred storms to scatter the Greek fleet, and Ares roared alongside the Trojans, his armor slick with gore. Even Zeus, pretending neutrality, weighed the scales, letting Achilles' wrath burn unchecked until Patroclus's corpse cooled in the dirt. This wasn't war, it was a celestial chessboard, every move dictated by divine whims. Then there's Odysseus, the man who outwitted monsters but couldn't escape the gods' games. Athena adored him, her favorite mortal, smoothing his path with cleverness and disguises. But Poseidon, the sea god's grudge ran deeper than the ocean. After Odysseus blinded his son Polyphemus, every wave became a hammer, every calm a taunt. 10 years of wandering weren't just bad luck, they were divine punishment, a lesson in humility carved by tidal force. Even his homecoming was haunted by Olympian drama. While Athena helped him slaughter the suitors, Zeus threw thunderbolts as punctuation, a reminder that mortal justice still needed heavenly approval. Perseus's quest for Medusa's head reads like a god's shopping list of favors. Hermes lent him winged sandals, Athena polished his shield into a mirror, and Hades slipped him the cap of invisibility. But this wasn't generosity, it was a setup. The gods needed Medusa dead, and Perseus was their blade. Every step, from the Greeks' shared eye to Andromeda chained to the rocks, was orchestrated. Even his heroic rescue of Andromeda reeked of divine intervention, with Poseidon's sea monster conveniently slain to prove a point. Mortals don't win battles. They survive them. These myths reveal a brutal truth. To the Olympians, humans were pawns, sometimes cherished, often sacrificed, but always disposable. When Artemis demanded Iphigenia's life to appease the winds, Agamemnon slit his daughter's throat without hesitation. When Dionysus drove King Lycurgus mad for uprooting his vines, no one mourned the ruler clawing at hallucinations. The gods didn't just interfere, they consumed mortal lives like ambrosia, savoring the drama, the devotion, the despair. Their legends endure not because they were kind, but because they were terrifyingly, magnificently human, flaws and all. Hephaestus's revenge on Hera was a masterpiece of divine pettiness. After she cast him from Olympus for his lameness, the smith god spent years perfecting his craft and his grudge. When he finally returned, he came bearing gifts, including a golden throne so exquisite Hera couldn't resist. The moment she sat down, invisible chains snapped shut, binding her in place. No amount of godly strength could break Hephaestus's craftsmanship. The other Olympians begged, threatened, even promised him a place among them, but Hephaestus refused. He wouldn't free her until Zeus offered the one thing he truly wanted, Aphrodite's hand in marriage. The irony was brutal. The goddess of beauty, shackled to the very outcast Hera, had discarded. For all its cruelty, the throne became a legend, proof that even the overlooked could rewrite their fate with enough cunning. Artemis's wrath had a quieter, deadlier precision. When the hunter Actaeon stumbled upon her bathing in a forest pool, her punishment wasn't just death, it was humiliation. With a flick of her hand, she transformed him into a stag, his human mind trapped in an animal's body. His own hounds, moments ago loyal companions, caught his scent and tore him apart, their jaws dripping with the blood of a man who no longer sounded like their master. The myth twists the knife deeper. Actaeon was guilty of no crime but bad timing. Artemis didn't punish malice. She erased the line between witness and prey, a reminder that some boundaries, once crossed, can't be uncrossed. Then there's Dionysus and King Lycurgus, a tale of hubris that ended in vines. When the Thracian king banned Dionysus's worship, driving his followers into hiding, the god responded with slow, poetic torment. He invaded Lycurgus's dreams first, filling them with creeping tendrils and the scent of fermenting grapes. Then madness took root. Convinced his own son was a monstrous vine, Lycurgus hacked him to pieces with an axe, only Chinese letter in horror at what he'd done. Still, Dionysus wasn't satisfied. He had the king tied to a mountainside, where wild vines grew through his flesh, their roots drinking his blood until he withered into the earth. The message was clear: reject the god of ecstasy, and you reject life itself. Even Aphrodite, radiant as dawn, had shadows in her myths. When the princess Psyche's beauty drew comparisons to the goddess, Aphrodite didn't just curse her, she engineered a tragedy. Sending her son Eros to make Psyche fall for a monster, she never expected him to prick himself with his own arrow. The resulting love affair became a labyrinth of trials, sorting impossible piles of grain, fetching beauty from the underworld, even a death-like sleep broken only by Eros's desperate kiss. Psyche's suffering wasn't just punishment, it was Aphrodite's twisted lesson on the price of standing too close to divinity. These lesser-known stories peel back the Olympians' glamour, revealing gods who wielded power not just in thunderbolts and tridents, but in psychological warfare. Their punishments weren't merely brutal, they were personal, tailored to strike at the heart of every mortal weakness, because for all their immortality, the gods understood one human truth better than anyone. The deepest wounds aren't those that bleed, but those that linger in the mind long after the flesh has healed. Every Olympian carried a signature not just in their myths, but in the symbols and creatures that whispered their presence long before they appeared. Take Athena's owl, its unblinking eyes mirroring the goddess's own piercing insight. This wasn't just a bird, it was a living emblem of wisdom's silent vigilance, able to see through darkness while others fumbled in the light. Cities engraved its image on coins, generals sought its flight patterns before battle, and philosophers praised its quiet watchfulness. The owl didn't just represent Athena, it became her shadow in the mortal world, a reminder that true knowledge thrives where others fear to look. Apollo's python coiled around his myths like a second skin. Before Delphi belonged to him, the monstrous serpent python guarded its fissures, breathing prophecy into the earth's fumes. When Apollo slew it with his golden arrows, he didn't just claim the oracle, he absorbed its power. The python's carcass rotted beneath his temple, its decay feeding the prophetic vapors the Pythia inhaled. Later, Apollo's lyre would be decorated with serpentine motifs, a nod to the beast he conquered and the wisdom he stole. Even his laurel wreath hid a serpent's lesson. Daphne, transformed into a tree to escape him, left leaves that crowned victors but carried the sting of refusal. Then there's Poseidon's stallion, surging from sea foam with hooves that could split cliffs. The god didn't just create horses, he infused them with the sea's untamed spirit. Their manes mirrored crashing waves, their speed echoed riptides, and their loyalty mirrored the ocean's fickleness, calm one moment, treacherous the next. When Poseidon gifted them to mortals, it wasn't generosity, it was a leash. Kings who offended him found their chariot teams bolting into the surf, dragging their riders into the god's domain. Artemis's stag carried a darker duality. Its antlers framed the moon like a living altar, yet its blood stained her arrows. The goddess who protected young girls also demanded their hunts be flawless, a reflection of the stag's grace and the butcher's precision required to bring it down. Her hounds, tongues lolling in relentless pursuit, were extensions of her will, swift, merciless, and utterly devoted. Even Aphrodite's doves hid thorns beneath their softness. Released during weddings, they symbolized love's purity, but their frantic wings also mirrored the chaos of passion, how easily it could take flight or be snatched by hawks. Her scallop shell, cradling her birth, wasn't just a pretty relic. Its ridges could slice flesh as surely as desire could carve open a heart. Hephaestus's anvil rang with purpose. Unlike other god symbols, his tools, the hammer, the tongs, were extensions of his body, each strike a testament to turning brokenness into strength. The quail, sacred to him, was no majestic creature but a humble bird that limped when injured, yet never stopped moving. These emblems weren't decorations. They were the god's fingerprints on the world, a language beyond words. To hold an olive branch wasn't just peace, it was Athena's promise. To wear a laurel wasn't just victory, it was Apollo's smirk. And to drown beneath the waves, that was Poseidon signing his name in salt water. Every symbol carried a story, and every story carried a warning. The divine leaves marks everywhere, if you know how to read them. To honor the gods was to breathe life into the unseen, a dance of smoke and sacrifice, whispered prayers and pounding hearts. The Greeks didn't just worship the Olympians, they wove them into the rhythm of daily existence, each ritual a thread binding heaven to earth. At Delphi, Apollo's oracle perched on the slopes of Mount Parnassus, her voice trembling with divine possession. pilgrims climbed the sacred way, clutching offerings and questions, their footsteps echoing through centuries of desperation. The Pythia, seated atop a tripod above fissures that spewed prophetic vapors, would convulse as Apollo's spirit overtook her. Her answers came in riddles, cryptic verses scribbled by priests' advice that could crown kings or doom armies. When Croesus asked if he should invade Persia, her reply, "A great empire will fall," became his own epitaph. This wasn't mere superstition. It was a dialogue with the divine, where every word carried the weight of fate. Demeter's worship pulsed with a different kind of mystery. The Eleusinian mysteries, held in the shadows of autumn, promised initiates something no other cult dared: hope beyond death. For 9 days, thousands walked the sacred road from Athens to Eleusis, reenacting Demeter's grief-stricken search for Persephone. The rituals were cloaked in secrecy under pain of death. No one ever revealed what transpired in the Telesterians' torchlit hall. But fragments hint at revelations: a single ear of wheat, symbolizing life's cyclical return, a sacred drink that opened eyes to the afterlife's golden fields. Those who emerged spoke of terror and ecstasy, of darkness shattered by unearthly light, the promise that just as Persephone rose from the underworld, so too would the souls of the faithful. No other rite held such power. Even slaves and foreigners could partake, their mortality momentarily erased by Demeter's grace. Zeus demanded awe, not intimacy. At Olympia, his colossal ivory and gold statue, one of the 7 wonders, drew pilgrims from every corner of the Mediterranean. Every 4 years, wars paused for the Olympic Games, where athletes competed not for medals but for his favor, victors crowned with olive wreaths from the sacred grove. The sacrifices here were staggering: 100 oxen slaughtered in a single day, their smoke curling into the sky like a bridge to the divine. Yet Zeus's most personal worship happened in humble courtyards, where families poured libations at tiny altars, invoking him as Zenios, protector of guests. To betray hospitality under his watch was to invite thunderbolts. Dionysus blurred the lines between worship and delirium. His Maenads abandoned their looms and children for the mountains, their bare feet crushing ivy as they danced under the moon. Drums pounded like frantic heartbeats, wine mingled with raw animal flesh torn apart in their teeth. To resist his call was dangerous. Pentheus learned this too late, his body shredded by his own mother in her god-maddened state. Yet in cities, Dionysus was tamed into theater. His festivals birthed tragedies where mortals grappled with the very forces his cult embodied. To watch Oedipus blind himself or Medea slaughter her children was to stand at the crossroads of divine and human folly, a ritual of catharsis as potent as any temple rite. Even Hestia, who shunned grand temples, was never ignored. Her flame burned in every home's central hearth, its tending a sacred duty. Before meals, the first bite was cast into the fire for her. Newborns were carried around it in circles, their lives literally orbiting her warmth. When colonies set sail, they carried coals from their mother city's hearth, a piece of Hestia's spirit to kindle anew in distant lands. Her worship required no priests, only the unbroken chain of hands passing fire from one generation to the next. The gods were honored in ways as varied as their domains, through blood and wine, whispered secrets and roaring crowds. But every ritual shared a single purpose: to touch the untouchable, if only for a moment. Whether in Delphi's cryptic echoes or Eleusis's midnight revelations, the Greeks didn't just seek the gods' favor. They sought proof that the divine was never far, and that even in the dark, a spark of Olympus still flickered. The Olympians didn't just rule myths, they conquered the human imagination. Their likenesses carved, painted, and etched into every era of art like divine fingerprints. Start with the colossal statue of Zeus at Olympia, a masterpiece so lifeless it was said to make visitors weep. Towering over 40 feet, the god sat enthroned in ivory and gold, his thunderbolt poised to strike, his cloak draped with scenes of gods and heroes, a visual hymn to his power. Sculptors didn't just depict Zeus, they captured his presence, the way his brow seemed to gather storm clouds even in marble, and when earthquakes toppled it centuries later, the loss felt personal, as if the heavens themselves had dimmed. Then there's the Parthenon's pediments, where Athena burst forth fully armed from Zeus's skull, her birth frozen in stone above Athens. The sculptor Phidias didn't just show a goddess, he carved her divinity into the drape of her chiton, the owl perched on her shoulder, the spear resting lightly in her hand as if she might step down and rally an army. Even shattered by time, the fragments scream with motion, horse nostrils flaring, gods leaning into whispers, the moon's chariot wheels mid-spin. This wasn't decoration, it was theology in 3 dimensions. Pottery tells a rawer story. Black figure amphorae from the 6th century show Dionysus lounging with satyrs, his cup never empty, vines curling around the clay like they're alive. Hermes darts across wine cups, his caduceus a quick stroke of the brush, guiding souls to the underworld as if death were just another errand. Even the mundane became mythic. Water pitcher might feature Hera's peacock, spreading its iridescent feathers, each eye a tiny glint of glaze watching the drinker. Renaissance painters borrowed Olympus wholesale, draping gods in the silks and marble of their own world. Botticelli's Birth of Venus isn't just Aphrodite on a shell, it's the Italian Renaissance reborn as myth, her golden hair mirroring Florentine ideals, the wind gods Zephyr and Aura blowing her ashore like patrons ushering in a new age. Titian's Bacchus and Ariadne explodes with color, the god leaping from his leopard-drawn chariot, his cloak a whirl of crimson, the sky behind him the exact blue of Venetian glass. The Olympians never really left us. They simply traded thunderbolts for oil paint, temples for galleries, and in doing so, proved their greatest power wasn't immortality, it was reinvention. Every stroke of the chisel, every dab of pigment was a prayer, not to the gods they depicted, but to the human hands that dared to make them visible. The Olympians never truly left the stage, they just traded marble temples for Hollywood screens and paperback pages. Rick Riordan's Percy Jackson series catapulted them into the modern era, where Adiachi demigods texted on smartphones and battled minotaurs in middle school gyms. Percy, son of Poseidon, wasn't just a hero, he was a gateway, his sarcastic voice making Hermes's caduceus as relatable as a subway pass. Riordan's genius wasn't just updating the myths, it was exposing their bones. When Medusa runs a garden gnome emporium in New Jersey, or Hades wears a tailored suit in the underworld's corporate lobby, it's more than a gag, it's a reminder that these gods survive by adapting, their essence unchanged even when their veneer shifts. Then there's God of War, where Kratos' rage paints Olympus in blood. The games strip away the gods' grandeur, revealing them as petty, vicious, and terrifyingly human. Zeus isn't a wise ruler here, he's a paranoid tyrant clinging to power. Ares isn't just war incarnate, he's a sadist who tricks Kratos into murdering his own family. The franchise's brutality isn't just spectacle, it's a dark mirror to the myth's own unflinching violence, where gods always demand more blood than mortals can afford to spill. Yet even in this carnage, traces of ancient reverence linger. The blades of chaos echo Hephaestus's craftsmanship, and Athena's ghostly guidance borrows straight from Homer's battlefield whispers. Wonder Woman's Amazonian roots tie her lasso to deeper myths. The Mycera isn't just a hidden island, it's a pocket of the ancient world, where Hippolyta's armor recalls Athena's strategists and Antiope's ferocity mirrors Artemis's huntresses. When Diana clashes with Ares in the 2017 film, their battle isn't just fists and lightning, it's a debate older than Plato. Ares sneers that humanity is inherently violent. Diana fights for their capacity to choose kindness. This tension isn't new. It's the same one Hesiod wrestled with when he wrote of Pandora's box. Are humans pawns of divine cruelty, or can we defy our fates? Even Disney's Hercules, 1997, for all its singing hydras and satyr sidekicks, gets one thing devastatingly right: the god's loneliness. Hades, with his blue flame hair and dealmaker grin, isn't just a villain. He's the underworld's overlooked middle child, his bitterness festering like a wound. Megara's arc, bound by a deal she can't escape, mirrors the mortal heroes trapped in divine games millennia ago. And when Hercules chooses mortality for love, it's a twist Euripides would have applauded, proof that humanity, not godhood, is where the real legends are made. These adaptations don't just retell myths, they reanimate them. Whether through Percy's dyslexia, a clever nod to ancient Greek being literally unreadable to modern eyes, or Kratos' grief-stained vengeance, they prove the Olympians aren't relics. They're templates, their stories flexible enough to frame our modern fears, ambitions, and identity crises. The gods haven't faded, they've just learned to stream. Zeus's lovers didn't fall for a king, they fell for a wolf, a bull, a shower of gold. His disguises weren't just tools of seduction, they were weapons of deception, stripping mortals of any real choice. When he appeared to Leda as a swan, her terror was immortalized alongside her desire. Art shows her recoiling even as she's drawn into his wings. The result: Helen of Troy, hatched from an egg, her beauty a time bomb wrapped in divine hypocrisy. Danae, locked in a bronze tower by her father to thwart prophecy, found Zeus slipping through the bars as golden rain, impregnating her with Perseus. The message was clear: no prison could keep out a god's whims, and no mortal's consent could hold weight against divine hunger. These weren't love stories, they were power plays disguised as passion, where the fine line between worship and violation blurred beyond recognition. Hera's vengeance, by contrast, was never disguised. When Zeus's affairs left trails of demigods and heartbreak, she couldn't punish her husband, so she turned her fury on the women and children instead. Take Leto, pregnant with Apollo and Artemis, cursed to wander until no land under the sun would shelter her. Hera forbade even the earth from offering rest, leaving Leto to clutch a floating island as her womb swelled with twins who'd one day return her suffering 1,000-fold. Then there was Semele, tricked into begging Zeus to reveal his true form, a request that burned her to ashes the moment he obliged. Hera's hand was invisible, but the outcome was orchestrated with surgical precision. Even Hercules, Zeus's most beloved son, faced her wrath from infancy. She sent serpents to strangle him in his cradle, then later drove him into a madness so profound he slaughtered his own family. Hera didn't just punish, she weaponized grief, ensuring every lesson lingered like a scar. The gods' cruelty wasn't limited to personal vendettas, it infected entire cities. When Queen Niobe boasted that her 14 children outshone Leto's 2, Apollo and Artemis descended with arrows like falling stars. One by one, they cut down Niobe's sons and daughters as she watched, her pride crumbling into screams. The massacre didn't end with the children. Niobe's tears turned her to stone, yet still her statue wept eternally, a monument to mortal hubris and divine pettiness. This wasn't justice, it was overkill, a reminder that the gods' egos were landmines no human could navigate safely. Even Athena, celebrated for wisdom, had moments where her brilliance curdled into spite. Take Medusa, once a beautiful priestess in her temple. When Poseidon raped her on Athena's altar, the goddess didn't punish the sea god. She transformed Medusa into a monster, her hair twisting into snakes, her gaze turning men to stone. The message was grotesque. Victimhood could damned as easily as it could be pitied. Centuries later, Perseus would decapitate her, and Athena would mount the Gorgon's head on her shield, turning Medusa's curse into a weapon. The cycle was vicious, unforgiving, and entirely one-sided. The darkest myths reveal an uncomfortable truth: the Olympians weren't role models. They were forces of nature, their morality as shifting as tides. Worship them, fear them, tell their stories, but never assume they'd play fair. Because in the end, their tales weren't about righteousness. They were about what happens when absolute power meets absolutely no accountability. The night sky wasn't just a canvas of stars to the ancients. It was a divine ledger, each celestial body etched with the names and stories of Olympus. Look up, and you'll find the gods immortalized in planets and constellations, their myths written in cosmic ink. Venus, that radiant evening star, doesn't just bear Aphrodite's Roman name. It carries her essence, glowing with the same allure that once launched 1,000 ships. When it outshines every other planet, it's as if the goddess herself is reminding us that beauty, like the heavens, is never passive. It demands attention. Mars, though, pulses with a different energy. Named for Ares, its reddish hue isn't just iron oxide. It's the rust of battlefields, the stain of a god who thrived in chaos. Ancient astronomers didn't merely label it. They saw Ares's spirit in its erratic orbit, its storms mirroring the tempers of war. Even now, when rovers crawl across its dusty plains, they're treading ground that myth once painted with the blood of fallen giants. Jupiter, the solar system's king, wears Zeus's mantle perfectly. Largest of all planets, its storms swirl like the god's own thunderclouds, its gravitational pull bending the paths of lesser bodies, just as Zeus dictated the fates of gods and mortals. The Great Red Spot, a storm raging for centuries, might as well be his unblinking eye, watching for any challenge to his rule. Then there's Mercury, fleet-footed and elusive, darting across the sky like Hermes, delivering messages between realms. Its speedy orbit mirrors the god's restlessness, always first to rise and first to fade. And Saturn, slow and solemn, bears the name of Kronos, the deposed Titan. Its rings, shattered remnants of celestial battles, echo the myth of a ruler who devoured his children only to be dethroned by them. Constellations, too, are steeped in divine drama. Orion, the hunter, strides across the winter sky with his belt of 3 stars, but his story is tangled with Artemis's wrath. Boasting he could slaughter every beast on earth, he earned her fury when a single scorpion's sting felled him. Now, as Orion sets, Scorpius rises, their eternal chase written in starlight. The Pleiades, those 7 sisters clustered tight, flee Taurus the bull in a celestial retelling of Zeus's predatory guise. Even Andromeda, chained to her rocky fate, hangs beside Perseus and Pegasus, her rescue frozen in the heavens. This wasn't just poetry. The Greeks didn't name the sky, they read it. Planets weren't dots of light, they were omens. When Mars drew close, generals saw Ares sharpening his spear. When Venus shone bright, lovers swore Aphrodite blessed their vows. Astronomy and myth weren't separate, they were twin languages telling the same story. The gods are never truly gone, they're just waiting, woven into the cosmos, for us to look up and remember. The Olympians have outlasted empires, transcended languages, and seeped into the very marrow of our stories because they were never just gods, they were mirrors. Cracked, warped, and dazzlingly imperfect, they reflected our best and worst selves back at us with divine clarity. Zeus's tempestuous leadership, Athena's razor-sharp intellect, Aphrodite's destructive allure, these aren't distant legends. They're blueprints for the human condition, packaged in lightning bolts and golden apples. What makes them timeless isn't their power, but their flaws. Hera's jealousy that could level cities, Poseidon's petty grudges that drowned armies, Hephaestus's resilience forged in exclusion. We recognize ourselves in their triumphs and follies, their love and rage, their capacity to build and destroy in equal measure. Think of how often these myths resurface not as dusty relics, but as living frameworks. Every superhero's origin whispers of demigods. Every love story tangles with Aphrodite's curse. Every underdog victory carries Athena's strategic spark. The Olympians endure because they taught us how to frame our chaos. When we say someone has an Achilles heel or faces a Herculean task, we're not just borrowing phrases, we're invoking archetypes carved into collective memory millennia ago. But here's the real magic. These stories belong to you now. Maybe you're drawn to Artemis's untamed independence, or you see yourself in Hermes's clever adaptability. Perhaps you've wrestled with Apollo's impossible standards or cackled at Dionysus's chaotic charm. That's the gift of mythology. It's a buffet of meaning, and you get to choose what nourishes you. So tell me in the comments, which god or myth lives rent-free in your imagination? Is it Persephone's duality between light and dark, Odysseus's cunning against the odds? Or some deeper cut, like the tragedy of Icarus or the resilience of Psyche? If these tales ignited something in you, a curiosity, a debate, a newfound awe for ancient storytellers, don't let it end here. Hit subscribe and join me as we keep unraveling mythology's greatest threads, from the cosmic dramas of the Norse pantheon to the trickster tales of West Africa. Because the gods may have ruled Olympus, but their stories, those are ours to keep telling.